to worry about the message that's being sent that if you commit crimes in the president's name, if you commit crimes to further the president's agenda, those crimes are okay. And what message that sends to police officers, and how we'll be able to have a justice system if we don't have police officers who believe that they'll be supported.
Hi again, everyone. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. Keep that message in mind from former prosecutor Jason Manning. He worked on the January 6 cases as we bring you stunning new developments that are essentially turbocharging the president's retribution tour. After already wiping out the Justice Department's most sprawling investigation in its own history by pardoning the nearly 1,600 rioters who were charged for their roles on January 6, a Trump-appointed prosecutor is now taking things further. Acting U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Ed Martin, announced today a, quote, special project to investigate the use of the obstruction charge that was brought against hundreds of January 6 defendants. Back in June, the United States Supreme Court narrowed the scope of who that charge applied to. Martin's announcement appoints 2 officials to look at the use of the charge during the January 6 investigation and requires them to issue a preliminary report by Friday. Wall Street Journal reports, according to people familiar with the matter, quote, within the U.S. Attorney's Office, some prosecutors viewed Martin's inquiry as an opening salvo in the Trump administration's stated aim of investigating the January 6 investigators. And as we mentioned in the last hour of our coverage, we have also learned this afternoon that Trump's DOJ has fired personnel who worked on special counsel Jack Smith's team. That team investigated and indicted Donald Trump for his conduct on January 6. A DOJ official telling NBC News that acting AG does not, quote, trust these officials to implement Donald Trump's agenda. That is where we start the hour. Some of our favorite reporters and friends. NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard is here. Also joining us, host of the Bulwark podcast, MSNBC political analyst Tim Miller is here. Former U.S. Attorney, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Harry Litman's here. And joining me at the table, New York Times investigative reporter, MSNBC national security contributor, who also has a new story on retribution. Mike Schmidt is at the table. Vaughn Hilliard, I start with you. I'll give our viewers a little note that you're at an event. There may be some ambient noise, but tell us what you know about these developments.
Right. I think it's notable when you're talking about Ed Martin specifically being put into this capacity that he was to essentially greenlight such an investigation and such an inquiry as this, is that Ed Martin was an individual who was affiliated with the 2020 election Stop the Steal effort. And in so many ways, we did not know what the consequences of January 6th would be. At the same time, we knew that individuals affiliated with the effort that Donald Trump effectively condoned by and large have become very much front and central characters in his next administration, or tangentially through his administration. He's here in Florida about to address the House GOP conference, their annual meeting. Speaker Mike Johnson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, almost the entirety of the Republican House caucus is here. And this announcement this afternoon comes at a time in which Republicans are looking to Donald Trump and essentially all but deferential to him, not only in their confirmation of Pete Hegseth, but also Speaker Johnson just a few moments ago was asked a series of questions about his controversial decisions, those of Donald Trump's, and really said that there is no space between him, the conference, and the White House. And when you look at somebody like Ed Martin and the inquiry into these DOJ prosecutors, individuals who were career individuals and not liberals, but also conservatives, individuals who were career employees that still by and large are working inside of the administration. Today, the Department of Justice, they are not the top names of Merrick Garland that folks back home are familiar with, but they are prosecutors who have long worked at the DOJ, and even those who have been there for the last couple of years that took on the work of prosecuting those who were behind the January 6th attack. And now a key ally of Donald Trump's politically is here at the forefront with this opening inquiry.
Harry Litman, Ted Cruz called the January 6th insurrection, quote, domestic terrorism. So I guess you'd forgive career staff at the department if they thought they were doing a righteous thing by prosecuting men and women who physically beat cops, 6 of whom would go on to die, 1 from injuries, 5 from suicide. What happens to folks who are now targeted for firing or worse as part of Trump's retribution tour?
They personally, Nicole, will have a whole panoply of potential remedies, but this is odious and unprecedented. As you say, the career folks who were assigned these cases, yes, I think they saw them as righteous. They were righteous. That's the thing that Trump is trying to efface. But even if they weren't, they were doing their job as they've always done, without fear or favor. And it's an absolute stake in the heart to try to say, for that reason, you need to be investigated. This is arch politicization and a complete distorted portrayal of what happened before. Nothing like this has ever happened before. Everybody in the DOJ regards the career officials as the lifeblood of the place, and that the attempt here is to suck it dry. It is really, really odious.
I mean, Tim Miller, there would be one thing to say today if the department leapt to hold Donald Trump accountable for a crime he committed on live TV, telling people to, quote, fight like hell or you won't have a country. It's another thing entirely when it appeared from the outside that Merrick Garland was very, very, very reluctant, and seemingly only in the wake of the congressional investigation even turned and appointed someone to investigate Trump's role in this. And I wonder if you can just give some voice to how upside down this is, that career prosecutors at a department that from the outside appeared very reluctant to aggressively pursue the masterminds of the January 6th insurrection, and ultimately only the most violent perpetrators were spending any time in jail. The seditious conspiracy convictions were also wiped out by Donald Trump. But the idea that there was anything aggressive or anything that wasn't beyond by the book is farcical. And I just, before the history is rewritten and we all have our nose pressed against the glass of Trump's retribution tour, a quick note on how conservative, small c conservative, Merrick Garland really was.
Absolutely. No, for sure. And there is this Earth One, Earth Two element to this debate in particular, all of our politics now, but it's just so striking here. You know, in a lot of the pro-democracy circles, advocacy circles that were trying to, hold Trump and others accountable for the attempt to overthrow the 2020 election. There was frustration by how small c conservative Merrick Garland was in kind of addressing these crimes and whether that there were some delays and whether they should have moved more quickly. And in Trump world, in MAGA world, Merrick Garland is like some boogeyman that was just targeting people baselessly for their politics and was going after them, and it was unprecedented weaponization of the government. It is just two completely opposite views. Obviously, from my perspective, the MAGA world is completely upside down in this. But the other thing that is upside down in this, you read that statement at the top, and I just wanted to reread one sentence of it just to show you just how strange, really how different it is where the MAGA folks are taking us on this. In light of their actions, so these career employees who we're talking about, and this is a statement from the Trump official, in light of their actions, the acting attorney general does not trust these officials to assist in faithfully implementing the president's agenda. That is such an unusual thing to say about the Department of Justice, right? I mean, you were in the White House. Like the idea that career officials whose job it is to prosecute criminals, like also needed to be concerned about implementing the president's agenda, that is just not how things have been done historically. And so the fact that they would put that in a statement, like coming from a spokesperson at the department, shows that they're unapologetic about just completely wiping away this notion that there is independence in the judiciary, and that the people that work there have obligations beyond service to Donald Trump.
Mike, Trump telegraphed the retribution part of his candidacy, but now that it's taking form, it is specific, it is unsparing, and you and your colleagues write today that it does include threats of violence.
Yeah, I mean, about what they did today, the retribution campaign is much more organized and has a standing start to it than certainly it had in his first term. in his first term, they did go back and Barr looked at the Flynn investigation. There was a whole look at the Flynn investigation, the criminal case they really, really didn't like. And it ultimately ended up with the Justice Department having that conviction thrown out. But that was one case, and it took until the third and fourth year of the presidency for that to kick in. We're here on day 8, 7, 8, 9, wherever we are, and there is systemic things that we have seen come out. On the first day, he signs this executive order that puts in place a process, a fact-finding process, to look for political bias. So the important thing to see here is that there's a structure and an architecture to this that's different. He has a U.S. attorney, an interim U.S. attorney, whoever this top prosecutor is in Washington, who is moving ahead with something that has more order to it than sort of the slapdash version of the first term where, he tweets in the second, third, or fourth month about how Obama tapped my wires and that sets off a thing with House Republicans that leads to a memo that leads to this and that and takes a long time. They're moving much more quickly.